Hello. I'm mostly recording this for a friend. However, this is generally good practice for game resolution assets, in particular for characters. So, when you have a design, for this example, I am using the head slot for an Oracle set we made for Dota 2's Crownfall update. When you make items for a character, more often than not, they'll be symmetrical, so you really only just need the model one half, flip it over, and that way you save time on work, so you're not modeling the other half. When you're doing retopology, depending on what program you're doing it in, 3D Coat or Topogun or even in Blender itself, you can sometimes have a wobbly edge that doesn't go all the way to the center line of your scene. And that's fine. But just a few shortcomings when coming to mirror your model. You don't want to use the mirror modifier because that is not true geometry. And what I mean by that is if I turn on the mirror modifier, you can see that this is... I can't interact with this. I can turn this on to interact with it, but it is still technically simulated geometry. It's not what I would call true, real geometry. It is simply being generated by the mirror modifier. And the reason you want to do that is just because it gives you a lack of control over your entire scene. When you have geometry you're working on, you want it to all be there. The mirror modifier can also make you run into issues when it comes to rigging this, because the geometry isn't truly there. If you were going to use the mirror modifier and you knew what you were doing, you would want to apply that before the rigging stage, and probably before baking as well. So for this example, I have made the center edge on this cowl a little wobbly, and basically to fix this we are just going to select this whole edge loop, holding Alt and right click, and if you have non-manifold geometry, so for instance the bottom of this cowl is uncapped, you'll see that it has selected that whole loop going around here. And we don't want to scale that because then it stretches really badly. So we're going to deselect all of this and make sure that the only edges selected are right in the middle. And so these wobbly ones we want to align with this middle center axis. And what you want to do is do that while your pivot point is set to the 3D cursor. If you have it set to the median point and scale it like scale x0, you'll see that it's no longer lined up with the center. What you want to do is make sure you have your pivot point set to 3D cursor, so hit Shift C to recenter the cursor so it's on the origin, and then scale x0. So SX0 and then enter to apply that. Then when it comes to mirroring, we'll also be offsetting our UVs. So that way, when we take this into our baker of choice, whether it be Substance, Marmoset, or even back into 3D Coat, or even in Blender, we're not baking onto both sides at once. We only want to bake onto the one side. So what we're going to do for that is we're going to first, while we're still in the pivot point for the 3D cursor, we're going to hit Shift D to duplicate it, and that will let you move it around, but we're going to right click to just leave it where it is. Then we're going to hit Control M. Control M is the mirror function, and then X, and then hit enter. Alternatively, you could hit Scale X -1 and enter. It is functionally the same thing. Then we're going to invert our normals. We're going to select... with this still selected, you go to your UV image editor. If I select all these, you'll see that I'm only manipulating the UVs for that one side because it's selected. What I'm going to do is make sure our snap element is set to increment. You're going to hit G and then hold Control, and you're just going to drag it off screen. And so now we have, because your texture space is repeated in all directions, we have simply just offset this by 1. This has already been baked, but you would export this for baking this way. by having the one side that you do not want to bake to offset from your primary baking plane or texture plane. So now, if we go to object mode, we can also see there's this big nasty seam running down the middle. That's because these are not welded. Even though these are duplicated, they are not welded together. So all we need to do is go to merge, and click remove doubles. If you're using newer versions of Blender, that would be merge by distance. And that welds that whole seam. Now, depending on the software you use, your export may have a custom normal solution. If you have the option to do that, you will want to export with like angle-weighted normals or no normals. In 2.79, the option is to make sure auto smooth is turned off. In other versions of Blender, there is a smooth by angle function that I am not particularly familiar with. But when in doubt, if you find that when you are working with your geometry in Blender and you find you're getting like weird looking normals, the option to fix that is basically go to export, go to OBJ, and when you export it, you will want to make sure right normals. You will want to make sure right normals is turned off, and then you will simply re-export it into Blender. And that is the quickest and easiest way to zero out incorrect normals. Hopefully this has been a little helpful. But this is what I would consider the correct, proper way to mirror objects in Blender for working in video game character assets. You can use the mirror modifier if you know what you're doing, like if you know like the proper ins and outs and functions of the modifier tools. But if you want to work in like what is 100% pure geometry and not simulated from a modifier, this is the simplest way to do it. Anyway, hope that has been helpful.